Okay, I think just to keep to time and honour the time that you've given me today, I think we'll begin. I can continue to admit people as they arrive. So we have about 45 minutes together today. If you have to hop off before we finish, no problem. Just give us a wave as you go. And in that time, I'm going to take the first 20 minutes or so to share a little more with you about the course, what we'll cover, how the course works. And then the rest of the time is open for any questions you may have. And we can do those live if you'd like to come on and put your questions to me, or you can just drop them into the chat box and I'll scroll through and answer as many as I can. So firstly, a little bit about me, for those of you who don't know me that well. I've spent most of my career in brand strategy and communications, corporate social responsibility, sustainability narratives with global brands that you might recognize, companies like Levi Strauss or Patagonia, Peugeot, Timberland, but also working with tech scale-ups in renewable energy, food systems, construction, and working with NGOs on systems change campaigns. So you might wonder why I'm now focused on place. And it is a long story, but I can make that one short. But first, I'd just like to reflect on this morning, I reread a piece that Daniel Christian Wahl, who's the author of Designing Regenerative Cultures, wrote for our blog, Activate the Future, that you can find on Medium platform if you're on there, where he talked about insights and lessons learned during the first year of COVID-19 from a spiritual, economic, political and social perspective. And he spoke about his own visceral sense of separation from the forests of Tramontana and the sparkling waters of the ocean that nurture him when he was on what was virtually a 51-day house arrest in Mallorca in Spain, where he lives. And he also spoke about the inadequacy of technology. We've all become very grateful for Zoom, but its inadequacy for building human relationships compared to an in-person embodied experience. And I'm sure we've all felt that at times over the past 18 months. And he spoke of the deep experience of being a custodian of land and really putting his fingers into the soil of his home, connecting with the vibrancy of life within that soil and bringing it back to life is like bringing us home to ourselves. And that story really resonated with me because it's about the story of separation, which is ancient and which we are living out in many different ways. It's about the separation of us humans from nature, believing it's there for our service and exploitation, which is manifested in so much ecological harm and degradation. It's about the separation of humans and humans, which manifests in so many different ways: everyday sexism, racism, nationalism, inequality, colonialism, polarization of beliefs, and competition as foundational to organization and societal design. And it's about thousands of years of valuing the masculine psychological qualities like assertion, competitiveness, single tasking, over the feminine psychological qualities of collaboration and compassion. And we're not talking about gender here. It's about how we think and the parts of our beings that we activate. And it's also about prioritizing outer existence, what people think of us, how things look, our identity and our individualism over our inner development. And my deep belief that all of these stories of separation are much easier to begin to address in place, and that a key role for us as regenerative practitioners is in healing that story of separation. And I was thinking about what he wrote in many ways as the essence of what is power of place. So what is it and how did it come about? It's a learning journey, obviously, that's about regenerative placemaking, but what is that really? For me, it's the arena in which I feel we have the greatest possible opportunity to play a very visceral role in healing the stories of separation that have arisen over those hundreds of thousands of years. The story of separation is the context in which we work on the course. It's also about processes that help us deal with complexity. So after many years of working on systems change from a global perspective and decades observing and studying complexity, one of the things that was becoming increasingly apparent to me was that the levels of complexity in global systems are beginning to make it infinitely harder and slower to make the kind of change that is urgently needed. And global systems, it's not that you can't change them, but they're more moribund and slow to respond because of that complexity and because of the neoliberal systems that are in place than local systems. And even though, like the vast majority of people I know and have worked with, I was trained to think globally, I began to really realize the power of coming at systems change from a bottom-up, local, place-based perspective. And the third thing is really about people and complexity. So just as systems are complex, so are we as people. As we've advanced as a species, we've developed psychologically. There are many different foundational worldviews in operation in any one group of people that you can put in a room. There are many different cultural heritage that shape who we are. There are many different unique personalities and characters, and many different experiences of life that also shape who we are and how we respond. And in addition to that, there's a whole world of collective and individual trauma and human experience. So when we create anything like a change program, we're dealing with all that complexity across a supply chain or a global system. And the simple answer is it's easier to work with that in place in a very local and face-to-face context. So if I want to work on myself as a person, if I want to step up and be a better person, I have a very real and deep opportunity living in a small, close with a very disruptive and difficult neighbor, which asked me to call on my courage to really develop my capacity to communicate in a non-violent way, to resolve polarities and entrenched positions and challenges right on my doorstep. But if I want to do that within a global system, there are so many different steps where I'm removed from that experience, whether it's buying a pair of shoes or a piece of clothing, that is so far removed from my experience and my connection that I don't have an opportunity to work on myself and my development in the same way. So I'm called to step up and be a better human right here in place. So for me now, place is the most powerful interface between natural systems and human systems, and it's the most powerful interface for the story of separation between humans, and it's the most powerful interface for personal and systemic development to happen. Okay, so onto what's in the journey. Let me share my screen with you. Okay, and I am right at the end of the presentation instead of at the beginning. So I shall just scroll back through and arrive at the beginning, I hope, any second now. Okay, here we go. So here are some of the challenges that come up from people I've worked with in place, and you may find these reflect in your own experience, or you may have other challenges and other questions that you work on. So how do we work with the complexity of issues we face? That's a really common question. Is there a way to do that? Is there a better way to do that? How do we overcome entrenched polarities of visions, beliefs, divisions in our communities? How do we keep the lights on? How do we work with the people who want to keep the lights on while making the transformations we're being asked to make? How do we manage people in different mindsets? How do we sustain the energy to make changes that are often hard and painful and take time? How do we avoid falling into short-term thinking and think and work long-term like good ancestors? How do we know whether we're doing the right thing when we have no template to work on and no humans have been in this position of existential threat before? So those are some of the questions that come up, and there are many, many more. And what Power of Place is designed to do over a period of time is to start to touch on these questions and offer ways in which we can work with them in place. So there are three main premises and sort of three inquiries we work on. The first premise is that humans have a powerful role to play on planet Earth as catalysts for systemic evolution. So how do we discover what that role is for ourselves and for our projects? The second premise is to change the way we design, we have to change the way we think. So how do we consistently challenge our own thinking and that of others to ensure we're acting and being regenerative? And finally, that regenerative places are designed using living systems thinking, design, culture, and being. What is that, and how do we design systems and culture regeneratively? How do we embody it ourselves? What is it to embody what is regenerative? So we explore those things across a 12-week period, and at the end there are a further 2 days which we call the gathering, where, having worked on projects all the way over a period of 12 weeks, we gather together and share our learning and insights as an entire cohort. So during the whole period, we work on understanding the key principles of living systems design, which you can see running across the top. But each week we work on a particular aspect, and the course is divided into 3 phases: systems, people, and place. So the beginning part of the course, we're working on the really big chunks of foundational knowledge. What is living systems? How do we understand the way in which we think and how to change the way we think? How do we identify what our systemic role for our project might be? How do we lift up a story of place and form a concept around which we can build an evolutionary strategy for the future? In the middle of the course, we get into the human messiness, because most people who have worked with community development at any point in time, or anybody that works with other people, knows that we are messy creatures. We are not simple, we are complex. So how do we work with that complexity? How do we disrupt our own thinking? How do we work with decision making in complex systems? How do we work with regenerative communications, qualities of leadership? What is the whole people aspect of designing successful place-based regenerative programs? How do we design in human development into everything in which we work? And then finally, we come to really the practical side of working, developing a strategy and a plan for whatever project that you are working on. And right throughout the 12 weeks, we introduce different frameworks as support tools for this transformative work. Now, that probably sounds like a huge amount, and it is. But everything that we produce and everything that we share with you is available for a whole year, so you can keep coming back to it. So I would think of this as a smorgasbord, in a way, of beginning to dig into and understand what it means to be a regenerative placemaker. So practically, how does the journey work? There are 12 live sessions of 2 hours each over the 12 weeks. Then there is the gathering on the 2nd and 3rd of December, where we gather for an afternoon and a whole day to really share all of our experiences together and to work in fishbowls on those people who want to step up and be in the fishbowl and work on their individual project with all of our collective intelligence to bear with everything that we have learned. So each week on a Friday, there'll be pre-reading materials sent to you in advance of the live session. In the live session, we'll work in small cohorts And in the plenary during live sessions, we will have 2 different kinds of breakouts where you'll get to meet somebody who's not in your working cohort, but you'll also stay together with your cohort and work together with them over the period of time. Because I am very practical and I believe that most people learn by doing, you then receive an assignment after each live session, which will reflect the particular aspect of regenerative placemaking that we've worked on in that session and give you something practical to go away and work on. Each of those assignments is a standalone assignment, but over the period of 12 weeks, should help you systematically work on a particular project that you're interested in. It could be a live project that you apply the thinking to, or you could choose to take a retrospective project that is just finished and ask yourself the question, well, what if we had applied this piece of thinking? What if we had applied this technology? What if we had applied this approach? What if we had applied this framework? So that you can practice reflectively. Okay, in each of these live sessions, I've tried to share a new and different aspect of the course. And in this one, I really want to talk about framework thinking. So you can see on this page 2 very simple frameworks. On the left, something that you could consider quite binary that one could work with, which is a framework that allows us to say within this project that is a whole, are we acting regeneratively or are we acting degeneratively? Now, in practice, it's never as simple as that. So we add a different framework on top of that we understand that our journey towards designing a regenerative place-based system has many different stages to move through, and different places, different groups of people may be currently at different levels. So it may be that in your community, they are currently comfortable with the notion of working with green technology, or they may be comfortable working at sustainability, ESG, for example, as a model. But to get to truly regenerative systems and regenerative places, we have to move through another 2 different stages. So the framework on the right, which was originally designed by Bill Reed some time ago, gives us a framework of reference to say, okay, in our place-based project today, where are we currently working at? So what's the next stage of our development in everything that we do that we can aspire to work towards? And how do we get, say, from conventional business as usual all the way to regenerative? What is our journey, and what are the things that we are going to put in place and do to allow ourselves to get there over time? So how might that work, for example, in practice? Here you can see a rather lovely picture of an eco-tourism resort that is in Mexico called Playa Viva. It's a project which my colleagues at Regenesis Group worked on together with a very wealthy individual who acquired the property and had a deep aspiration to create the most sustainable ecotourism resort that he could, using all of the technology that was available to him. But when he called on Regenesis to work with him, and they looked at this project from a living systems perspective of potential, what was its evolutionary potential, and looked at the patterns and flows of how social communities had lived there, of the ecology, of the topography, of the economic flows, of the flows of water, of the flows of the more than human, the animal populations, in a process that we call an integrative study. They discovered a number of different interesting things, like turtles that were very rare and under threat of extinction nested there. a river had been dammed up and built over that used to flow through and create a very rich estuarine habitat. And the idea of the ecotourism resort really didn't include the local community and the local economy in any way. So what they looked at instead was a concept which would allow for the complete regeneration of not just the biology and the ecology of the place, but also involve the entire community of Playa Viva in the design, the build, the development, the running, and the ownership of the place, which allowed it to move forward to the next level of potential from where it had been at that point in time. What about if we were looking at a project through the living system lens of biocultural uniqueness, which is incredibly important, the process of identifying what the potential concept that we might be working with that would underpin everything that we design and do in place might be, looking at all of the different flows of energy from water, living as a living system, for example. We put another layer onto this particular framework, which started with just degenerative and regenerative, and look at a whole series of areas that we study. And beauty is an important one here. Beauty is a very powerful tool for human beings. It's very powerful in calling us to a higher level of spiritual awareness, a higher level of aspiration, and is definitely not to be underestimated in any way. But we also look at the flows of commerce, the flows of money through a place, for example, the flows of water, how education has transformed and changed over a period of time, to actually understand what the story of this place is and what the next regenerative step might be. And then we overlay that in this particular framework, which is called Lenses, Living Environments in Natural, Social and Economic Systems, by considering things like that are particular to the community that you are working in. And in this case, that you can see in front of you, this framework included that they chose that was important to them, the notion of stewardship, the notion of respecting limits, the importance of interdependence, the importance of justice, the importance of having an intergenerational view. So we use this framework as a way of holding conversations, designing workshops that integrate and build a future vision of where the community wants to go, what the place wants to be, whether it's a school, whether it's a shop, whether it's a city, whether it's an entire bioregion. And this particular framework enables us to ask and build some powerful questions. If we join the different elements of the petals together, we can, for example, say, well, how is this project, how is the energy and the education in this project delivering stewardship? How are we, through our application of beauty, taking into account an intergenerational view? How are we being really fully inclusive? Or how, in our care of the ecosystems and the management of the land, are we including across all of the generations the possibility for access and growing of food? How does it contribute to that? It helps us shape some powerful questions. So, for example, in the case of beauty, how is beauty to be embodied in this project? Can waste be reused in this project and celebrated beautifully? How can this project create enduring beauty? Is nature present in a meaningful way? How does the design express the appropriate era? And does this expression endure the test of time? Are the intended emotions and sensations evoked? So this is the role of frameworks in framework thinking. They are there as a tool to help us shape conversations, shape designs, and shape powerful questions. So what might the end result of that period of inquiry look like? And this is a picture of Pico in the Azores Islands. And one of the things that we discovered in looking at the Azores was the patterns over time were really all about rest and reprovisioning and revitalizing, whether that was pirates landing and reprovisioning there, or colonial forces, even perhaps slightly worse. But also the animal kingdom, nature, the patterns of whales and dolphins migrating from the south to the north, pass through these islands and stop and rest there. And this really showed up as a very strong pattern that was enabled us to think about, and we're just thinking about it now, what that means for the redesign of the tourism economy in this place. How can we manifest an economy that is true to the next stage of evolution for the Azores Islands, for example? And in the middle part of the course, as I said, we focus deeply on the idea of human messiness, which is incredibly important. And we look at the many qualities and practices that enable us to get to uncertain times. So how do we design for uncertainty? What does that look like? How do we design community interactions where there is really true inclusiveness? What is a framework that helps us do that? How do we deal with the hidden traumas, both individual and collective, that over centuries are part of our collective human experience? How do we deal with the increasing polarities and positions that we see being taken in the workplace, in our personal friend set, in our locality, in our projects? So we look at ways and qualities and practices that we have to develop. So, for example, if we think about the owner of the Playa Viva in Mexico, what did he have to do to be able to leave behind his deep aspiration to create the most sustainable eco tourism destination, to be able to include the local economy and the local ecology? What did he have to let go of? How did he do that? And we'll look at what that means for each of us individually and for the people within our projects and for our communities. We'll pay particular attention to how we work with and understand the different worldviews in the room. Because I think we would all acknowledge that there are many different worldviews that play out in the communities around us. And this is an analogy. The world looks very different when you're looking at it from street level to how you're looking at it from the roof, to how you're looking at it from the sky, and to how you're looking at it from outer space. So metaphorically, as regenerative practitioners in place, what we're always trying to do in the design of our projects, in our work on ourselves and in our work with our teams and other people, is lift the view of the vision from the street to the roof, to the sky, to the, always moving upwards to a bigger and more holistic living systems picture, whilst deeply respecting the fact that everybody is where they are and who they are, and that there is no judgment involved in that. We're all somewhere on that journey, and a journey that stretches beyond that we can't even yet imagine. So in the last part of the course, we start to get really practical. For example, not all of us have available budgets to do huge systemic projects, but many of us can, at a very cost-effective level, if we can understand where the nodal acupuncture points are in the systems in which we sit, start to create change. So what is systemic acupuncture? We all know, if we've been to places like Venice, or if we're lucky enough to live in the Caribbean, or places like Annecy in the south of France, what waterways, what the experience of connection to water does for the human experience and the ecology and the quality of air in a particular place in which we live, what arboreal acupuncture does, and what happens when water and arboreal acupuncture is decimated from a place, the difference that it makes to the quality of our experience. Music, for example, is also good systemic acupuncture. Every single place has its own song. And I don't necessarily mean jazz or beat or whatever the music is, although that's also true, particularly if you think of New Orleans, for example, it's inevitably associated with jazz. But there is a beat, there is a rhythm to all places, to its language, to its culture, that is incredibly powerful in an experience of place. And this is where we'll also look at very practical things in living systems design, which is the role of things like biophilia, biomimicry, biomorphy, in creating living systems and experience of living systems in place. So I'm delighted to say that we have some special guests, as always, on this journey. We're joined by Dr. Dominique Hess, who is the author of a book called Designing for Hope, which is an amazing book. She's also worked extensively with the framework that I just shared, and will be coming in to work with us some more on that. And I'm also delighted to say that Laura Storm, who I partnered with on 2 regenerative journeys, regenerative leadership last year, will also be joining us in the middle of the course when we start working on human messiness, and sharing her incredible wisdom around the qualities like patience, like presence, like silence, like dance even, and what they mean to us as leaders in place. So what will you learn? A whole lot, I hope. How to identify that evolutionary and transformative role that your project can play in the system in which it sits. How to shape a future story that underpins the strategy for the place-based project you're working on together with all your stakeholders. How to design a culture and environment in which diversity is truly celebrated. How to use framework thinking. I've touched on that most today. Working with the paradigm of thought and constant thought disruption to keep lifting yourself and others and your projects and your system towards a more regenerative way of working, and how to integrate regenerative design, culture and being into your work. And I know that does sound a lot, and it is a lot. So how can you get involved? You can register via our website. You could download the prospectus and register from there. And for those of you who are on quite a tight budget, and many of us are, we've tried to make the course as accessible as we can. We offer it at cost, so only our guest speakers are paid, but that's very important to us. You can apply for a 50% bursary. They are limited to charities and CICs and startups who are still generating funding, because we operate a gift economy policy, which is take what you need, pay what you can. So if you can pay the higher levels, then that enables us to put some of the money into our place-based work here. Okay, that's enough from me now. It's time for me to take some questions from you, and I'm just going to turn the recording off now so that you can feel comfortable to put those to me and know that they will not appear on YouTube.